Wyoming Territory, 1876. The bitter winds of autumn swept across the high plains, carrying the scent of approaching winter and the promise of isolation that would soon blanket Sweetwater County. For those who called this rugged frontier home, survival meant preparation, caution, and above all, self-reliance. No one understood this better than Roscoe Flynn. At 25, Roscoe had already spent 7 years working cattle across the territories. Tall and lean with shoulders broadened by hard labor, he possessed the quiet confidence of a man who'd faced down blizzards and rustlers alike. His face, handsome beneath a light stubble, rarely revealed the thoughts behind his clear blue eyes. Those who rode with him noted how he kept to himself, speaking only when necessary, smiling even less. Roscoe believed in a simple truth. Attachment was a luxury the frontier didn't permit. He'd watched good men die from foolish risks taken for love, seen families starve when sentiment outweighed sense. The West demanded a singular focus, survival, and he'd built his life around this principle. Companionship was temporary, connections dangerous. The only reliable partner was a good horse and a loaded Winchester. "You planning to winter at the Double Circle again?" asked Thomas, the local storekeeper, as Roscoe gathered supplies in Bitter Creek. "That's right. Mr. Hargrove needs men who can handle themselves when the snow flies. Might be nice to have a warm hearth of your own one day," Thomas suggested, a knowing look in his eye as he wrapped parcels of coffee and ammunition. Roscoe merely nodded, unwilling to entertain the thought. A man with a family was vulnerable. Too much to lose, too many ways to break. The trail had taught him that lesson clearly enough. Yet as he rode from town, a strange emptiness settled in his chest. 7 winters at the Double Circle Ranch. 7 springs moving cattle. 7 summers under endless sky, all blending together in a life that moved forward without truly changing. He'd never admitted, even to himself, how the sight of a family gathered around a table sometimes stopped him cold, or how the sound of laughter from the bunkhouse often drove him to solitary rides across the range. These were weaknesses he couldn't afford, distractions from the vigilance the frontier demanded. The following day, with autumn colors painting the cottonwoods golden along the banks of the Sweetwater River, everything changed. Roscoe was checking fence lines when the sound reached him, so unfamiliar it took a moment to recognize. Someone crying. Following the sound, he guided his horse through a stand of willows until he spotted her on the riverbank. A young woman sat hunched on a flat rock, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Madeline Russell had never intended for anyone to witness her moment of weakness. At 22, she'd prided herself on the strength that had carried her through 3 years of frontier hardship since her family had claimed their homestead. She'd endured drought, blizzards, and the crushing isolation that came with being 15 miles from their nearest neighbors. But today, the letter clutched in her trembling hands had finally broken her resolve. The sunlight caught in her chestnut hair, which had come loose from its pins to fall in waves past her shoulders. Her calico dress, practical but well-tended, marked her as someone who maintained standards despite frontier challenges. Beside her on the rock lay a worn leather satchel and a small book. Roscoe hesitated, uncomfortable at intruding on such a private moment. He considered turning away when her head suddenly lifted, alerted by his horse's snort. Their eyes met across 20 feet of open ground, hers wide and brown, rimmed with redness, his cautious and blue. For a long moment, neither moved. "Forgive the intrusion, ma'am," he finally said, removing his hat. I thought someone might be in trouble." Madeline quickly wiped her cheeks, mortified to be discovered in such a state. "I'm quite all right, thank you," she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. She folded the letter deliberately, tucking it into her pocket. "You're the Russell girl, aren't you? From the homestead north of here." She nodded, gathering her composure. "Madeline Russell. And you're one of Mr. Hargrove's men. Flynn, isn't it?" "Roscoe Flynn," he confirmed, surprised she knew of him. An awkward silence stretched between them. The proper thing would be to tip his hat and ride on, leaving her to her privacy. Instead, he found himself dismounting. "Is there something I might help with?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. Madeline almost dismissed him with the automatic assurance that all was well, the same words she'd been repeating for months to neighbors who asked after their struggling homestead. Something in his direct gaze stopped her. Unless you can make crops grow without rain or keep wolves from the livestock, I doubt it, she answered with unexpected candor. Her honesty caught him off guard. Most settlers maintained a stubborn optimism regardless of their circumstances, as though admitting hardship might somehow invite more of it. My brother James has gone to Cheyenne to find work for the winter, she continued, the words suddenly pouring out. Father's been ill since summer, and the letter I just received says our cousins in Ohio can't send the money they promised. She glanced down at her hands. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Roscoe shifted uncomfortably. This was precisely the entanglement he avoided. Other people's troubles had a way of becoming your own out here. Yet he couldn't simply ride away. The river's not safe for a woman alone, he said finally. May I see you home? She hesitated, then nodded. As she gathered her things, he noticed the book was a volume of poetry, Tennyson. Such a delicate thing seemed wildly out of place in this harsh landscape. The ride to the Russell homestead revealed more than Roscoe had anticipated. The small cabin and outbuildings showed signs of careful maintenance, but also the unmistakable strain of limited resources. A man in his 50s, clearly ill but determined, was attempting to split firewood when they arrived. His face brightened at the sight of his daughter, then grew wary as he noticed Roscoe. Father, this is Mr. Flynn from the Double Circle, Madeline explained. He was kind enough to escort me home. Harold Russell nodded cautiously, leaning on his axe. Appreciate the courtesy, Mr. Flynn. Roscoe meant to simply tip his hat and depart. Instead, he found himself dismounting again. Sir, if you don't mind, I could finish that wood pile for you before I head back. The older man's pride warred visibly with practicality before he nodded. Much obliged. What Roscoe intended as a brief courtesy extended into hours. The woodpile grew, repairs to a loose shutter were made, and when he finally mounted to leave, Harold Russell extended an invitation that surprised them both. Sunday dinner, if you're free, he offered. Least we can do. The proper response would have been a polite refusal. Roscoe Flynn didn't form attachments. He didn't accept invitations. He kept to himself and survived. Thank you, sir. I'd be honored, he heard himself say. As he rode away, Roscoe felt the first crack in his carefully maintained isolation. Glancing back once, he saw Madeline standing in the doorway, watching him go, and something unfamiliar stirred in his chest, a feeling that directly contradicted everything he'd come to believe about life on the frontier. Sunday dinner at the Russell homestead revealed a family clinging to civilization despite their circumstances. The table was set with care, the simple food prepared with obvious attention. What struck Roscoe most was the conversation about books, ideas, the wider world beyond Wyoming Territory. It was nothing like the practical talk of weather and cattle that dominated bunkhouse discussions. Madeline spoke of the school she'd attended in Ohio, of her hope to teach once the territory had enough children to warrant it. Her father discussed politics with surprising insight. There was laughter, genuine and warm, despite the obvious worries that lingered just beneath the surface. As autumn progressed toward winter, Roscoe found himself riding to the Russell homestead whenever his duties allowed. Each visit deepened the contradiction in his life. Every repair he made to their roof, every load of firewood he split, tied him more firmly to people who couldn't possibly survive the frontier without assistance. It was precisely the vulnerability he'd spent years avoiding. Yet he couldn't stop himself from returning, especially when he saw how Madeline's face brightened at his approach. Something was happening between them, something unspoken but undeniable. Why do you keep coming back? She asked him directly one afternoon as they walked along the frozen river. It's 15 miles out of your way. Roscoe considered his answer carefully. I've been asking myself the same question. And what answer do you give yourself? None that makes sense, he admitted. Everything I've learned says a man survives out here by depending only on himself. She studied him with those thoughtful brown eyes. Is survival all you want from life, Mr. Flynn? The question struck him like a physical blow. Before he could formulate a response, a gunshot echoed from the direction of the homestead. They froze for an instant before breaking into a run. They found Harold Russell standing shakily in the dooryard, rifle still raised, and the body of a wolf lying in the snow. 3 more wolves circled at a distance, eyeing the small flock of sheep in their pen. They're getting bold, Harold gasped, clearly exhausted by the effort. Been coming closer each day. That night, Roscoe didn't return to the double circle. He slept in the Russell's barn, rifle close at hand, listening for wolves. By morning, he'd made a decision that contradicted everything he thought he knew about frontier survival. "I'll stay through the week," he told Harold over breakfast. "Help secure things before the heavy snow comes." 1 week became 2. When James returned from Cheyenne with barely enough earnings to see them through winter, Roscoe had already reinforced the barn, repaired fencing, and established a routine of checking trap lines that kept meat on their table. "You don't have to do this," Madeline told him one evening as they sat by the fire. Her father and brother had retired early, leaving them in a rare moment of privacy. "I know," he answered simply. "Mr. Hargrove will wonder where you've gone. I rode over last week to explain. He's holding my position." She studied him in the firelight. "You never did answer my question about why you keep coming back." Roscoe stared into the flames, confronting the transformation happening within him. "My whole life out here, I've believed that attachment is dangerous, that caring for others is a weakness the frontier will exploit. And now," she asked softly, "now I'm not so sure." He met her gaze. "Maybe there's strength in it too." The day before Christmas, a blizzard howled across the plains, trapping them all indoors for 3 days. When it finally cleared, Roscoe and James dug paths to the barn and outbuildings. The pristine white landscape stretched unbroken to the horizon, beautiful but isolating. "Madeline said you lost your family young," James remarked as they worked. Roscoe nodded stiffly. "Cholera. I was 15. So you've been alone since then?" "By choice," Roscoe answered. "Seemed safer that way." James leaned on his shovel. "Doesn't seem like that's working for you anymore." Before Roscoe could respond, a distant movement caught his eye, riders approaching from the east. As they drew closer, he recognized the foreman from the double circle and 2 other hands. "Flynn," the foreman called as they approached. "Been looking for you. Something wrong at the ranch?" "You could say that. We've got trouble with Blackwell's outfit. They're claiming double circle cattle, cutting our fences." The foreman glanced toward the Russell cabin. "Boss needs every man. We're riding at first light." Roscoe felt the weight of 2 worlds pulling at him. The loyalty he owed Hargrove was real. The man had employed him fairly for years. But the thought of leaving the Russells, of leaving Madeline, created an unexpected hollowness in his chest. "I'll be there," he promised, knowing he had no real choice. That evening, he explained the situation to the Russells. Harold nodded with understanding, but Madeline's eyes betrayed her concern. "When will you return?" she asked when they had a moment alone. "I can't say," he answered honestly. "These disputes can turn ugly." She nodded, her composure admirable despite the fear he could see beneath it. "We'll manage." "Madeline, he began, then stopped, uncertain how to express the conflict raging within him. "You have obligations," she said simply. "I understand that better than most." The next morning, he rode out with the double circle men, looking back once to see her standing in the doorway, just as she had that first day. The memory stayed with him as they returned to the ranch, and preparations for confrontation began. The dispute with Blackwell's outfit escalated quickly. What began as arguments over cattle soon involved accusations of water rights, threats, and finally, violence. 2 weeks into the standoff, shots were fired at double circle riders checking fence lines. Hargrove brought in additional men, and tensions mounted. Through it all, Roscoe found his thoughts repeatedly turning to the Russell homestead. Were they safe? Had wolves returned? Was there enough firewood? The concerns he'd never allowed himself to feel for others now consumed him, challenging everything he'd believed about survival on the frontier. "You're distracted," Hargrove observed one evening as they discussed strategy. "That's not like you, Flynn." "Sorry, sir." The older rancher studied him. "This about those homesteaders you've been helping?" Roscoe nodded, seeing no point in denial. "The girl? Her family needs help to make it through winter." Hargrove considered this. "The frontier's no place for divided loyalties, son. When this business with Blackwell is done, you'll need to decide where you stand." 3 days later, the confrontation with Blackwell's men came to a head at the disputed water hole. Guns were drawn, threats exchanged. Roscoe found himself standing between the foremen of both outfits, trying to prevent bloodshed that would solve nothing. "Nobody needs to die over cattle and water," he argued. "There's enough for both spreads if we manage it right." His unexpected intervention created just enough pause for cooler heads to prevail. An uneasy agreement was reached, not peace, but a cessation of immediate hostilities. As they rode back to the double circle, Hargrove pulled alongside him. "That was well done," the rancher acknowledged. "But I'm thinking your mind's elsewhere these days." Roscoe didn't deny it. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to check on the Russell place. Make sure they're all right." Hargrove nodded. "Go. But Flynn," he added as Roscoe turned his horse, "when you come back, I expect a decision about your future here." The 15-mile ride to the Russell homestead gave Roscoe time to confront the transformation occurring within him. For years, he'd built his identity around independence, believing connection was weakness. Yet his concern for Madeline and her family had driven him to ride through fading light across snow-covered plains, risking the dangers of nightfall rather than waiting until morning. When the cabin finally came into view, lamplight glowing from its windows against the darkening sky, the relief he felt was overwhelming. Then he noticed something wrong. The barn door stood open, swinging in the wind. No smoke rose from the cabin chimney. Approaching cautiously, rifle ready, he dismounted and moved toward the cabin. The door opened before he reached it, and James Russell emerged, shotgun in hand. "Flynn, thank God," the young man exclaimed. "Father's taken bad. Madeline's with him, but we've no medicine, and the stove went cold hours ago. I was about to try for the neighbor's place." Inside, Roscoe found Madeline sitting beside her father's bed. Harold's breathing came in labored gasps, his face flushed with fever. She looked up as he entered, exhaustion and worry etched across her features. "Roscoe," she whispered, using his given name for the first time. "You came back. What happened?" His cough worsened 3 days ago. By yesterday, the fever started. She pressed a damp cloth to her father's forehead. "We're out of the medicine Dr. Wilson left." Roscoe assessed the situation quickly. The cabin was dangerously cold. The sick man needed medical attention, and nightfall had arrived. Decisions had to be made. "James, get the stove going again," he instructed. "I'll fetch more wood and check the animals. Then I'm riding for the doctor." "It's 15 miles to town," Madeline protested. "In darkness, with snow, I've made the ride before," he assured her, though never in such conditions. The next hours passed in desperate activity. By the time the cabin was warm again and the animals secured, Harold's condition had deteriorated further. Roscoe prepared for the dangerous night ride, taking only what was essential. Before mounting, he turned to Madeline, who stood in the doorway. The worry in her eyes made his decision clear in a way nothing else had. "I'll bring help," he promised. "Be careful," she answered, touching his arm. "I couldn't bear it if—" She stopped, unable to finish. In that moment, everything changed. The barrier he'd maintained between himself and the world cracked completely. Without planning to, he drew her close. "Madeline," he said softly, "I've been a fool. I thought staying apart from others made me stronger. I was wrong." He looked into her eyes. "I'll return. You have my word." The ride to town nearly killed him. Blinding snow, bitter cold, and the disorientation of night combined to create a journey that tested every skill he developed in 7 years on the frontier. Twice he nearly turned back, and twice the thought of Madeline waiting pushed him forward. When he finally reached Bitter Creek, the town was dark except for a single light in the doctor's house. Dr. Wilson, roused from sleep, didn't hesitate once he heard the symptoms. "Pneumonia, most likely," the physician said, gathering supplies. "We'll need to hurry." Dawn was breaking when they returned to the Russell homestead. Harold's condition had worsened, but the doctor's intervention came just in time. For 2 days, the outcome remained uncertain. Roscoe stayed, helping James with chores, keeping Madeline company during her father's feverish nights. On the 3rd morning, Harold's fever broke. As relief flooded the household, Roscoe stepped outside, needing a moment alone to process everything that had happened. Madeline found him by the corral, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered plains in shades of pink and gold. "Father's asking for you," she said, coming to stand beside him. "He's weak, but lucid." Roscoe nodded, suddenly uncertain. The crisis had passed. His presence was no longer necessary for their survival. "I should return to the double circle," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Hargrove will be expecting me." "I see," she answered softly, and he heard the disappointment in her voice. "Of course, you have obligations." He turned to her then, finally confronting the truth he'd been avoiding. "Madeline, I don't know how to do this. All my life, I've believed that attachment is dangerous out here. that caring for others is a weakness. And what do you believe now? She asked. The question hung between them, demanding an answer he'd been approaching since that first day by the river. Before he could respond, hoofbeats sounded from the east. 3 riders approached, double-circle men. Flynn, the lead rider, called as they drew near. Hargrove sent us to find you. Thought you might have run into trouble. Mr. Russell's been ill, Roscoe explained. I've been helping out. The rider nodded. Boss wants you back. Says if you're coming, come today. If not. He hesitated, glancing at Madeline. He'll understand, but your position will be filled. The moment of decision had arrived, more directly than Roscoe had anticipated. Security at the double circle, the life he knew, or the uncertain path before him now. Tell Mr. Hargrove I'm grateful for the years at double circle, he said finally. But I won't be returning. The riders exchanged glances, then nodded. As they turned to leave, one called back, Good luck, Flynn. You'll need it out here. When they'd gone, Madeline looked at him in astonishment. Roscoe, you can't give up your position for us. What will you do? I don't know exactly, he admitted. But I know I can't go back to the life I had before. That afternoon, sitting beside Harold's bed, Roscoe had the most important conversation of his life. The older man, though weak, was direct. My daughter cares for you, Harold said without preamble. And unless I'm mistaken, you feel the same. Yes, sir. What are your intentions, then? The question might have terrified him weeks earlier. Now, it simply clarified what he already knew. With your blessing, I'd like to court her properly. And in time, if she'll have me, make her my wife. Harold studied him. You've given up your position at the double circle. What will you do to support a family? I've saved most of my wages these past years, Roscoe answered. Enough to buy a small spread of my own. Or, he hesitated, then committed to the idea forming in his mind, to invest in an existing homestead that needs additional hands. Understanding dawned in the older man's eyes. You're proposing a partnership. Yes, sir. This is good land. With another pair of hands and some capital, it could be a prosperous operation. Harold was silent for a long moment. You'd be taking on quite a burden. A failing homestead, a sick old man, a family, Roscoe corrected gently. Something I haven't had since I was 15. That evening, as Roscoe and Madeline walked along the frozen river where they had first truly spoken, he told her of his conversation with her father. He's given his blessing, Roscoe concluded. If it's what you want. Madeline stopped walking to face him. Is it what you want, Roscoe? Truly? You've built your life around independence. You told me yourself that attachment is dangerous on the frontier. I was wrong, he said simply. I've been wrong for years. He took her hands in his. I thought strength meant standing alone. Now I understand it means having the courage to stand with others, despite the risks. She studied him, searching for certainty. The frontier is still a hard place. There will be droughts, blizzards, illness, and we'll face them together, he finished. If you'll have me. Tears welled in her eyes, but unlike that first day by the river, these were not tears of despair. I thought you saw me as an obligation, a responsibility you'd taken on. Never that, he assured her. You were the one who showed me what I'd been missing. A life of survival without connection isn't really living at all. As the sun began to set over the frozen plains, casting long shadows across the snow, Roscoe took her face gently in his hands. That day I found you crying by the river. I thought I was simply doing what any decent man would do. I didn't understand that my life was about to change completely. She smiled through her tears. And how has it changed? I've learned that the frontier doesn't make connection impossible. It makes it essential. He drew her closer. Madeline Russell, I love you. I want to build a life with you. Right here, no matter what challenges come. I love you too, she whispered. I have since that first day, when you stopped to help a stranger in distress. As they sealed their promise with a kiss, the last of Roscoe's barriers fell away. The man who had once believed in isolation as survival now understood the greater truth. Real strength came from connection, from having someone to fight for, someone whose heart was entrusted to your care. Spring arrived early that year. As the snow melted and the first green appeared on the plains, the Russell homestead buzzed with activity. New fencing rose around expanded fields. The barn received a much-needed addition, and plans were laid for crops that would sustain them through the coming year. On the first truly warm day of April, beneath a canopy of cottonwood trees by the river, Roscoe Flynn and Madeline Russell were married. The ceremony, attended by neighbors for miles around, symbolized more than just their union. It represented a truth about frontier life that Roscoe had finally embraced, that community and connection were not weaknesses but the very foundation of survival. That evening, as they stood together on the porch of the cabin that would be their home, Madeline rested her head against his shoulder. "Are you happy with your decision?" she asked. "Truly happy." Roscoe looked out at the land they would work together, at the life they would build. The isolation he'd once clung to now seemed like a distant memory, a misunderstanding of what strength really meant. "I've never been more certain of anything," he answered, drawing her close. "You found me just as lost as I found you that day by the river, just better at hiding it." She smiled up at him, the last light of day catching in her chestnut hair. "And what did we find together?" Roscoe thought of all the years he'd spent believing the frontier demanded isolation, that attachment was vulnerability. How wrong he had been. "Home," he said simply. "We found home." As darkness fell across the Wyoming plains, the lights of their cabin glowed with promise. The frontier remained challenging, unforgiving in its demands. But Roscoe Flynn no longer faced it alone, no longer believed that connection was weakness. Instead, in Madeline's love, in the family they would build together, he had discovered the true strength that would sustain them through whatever the frontier might bring.